Hello and welcome to the lecture on Unions of Men and Women Journalists in India. Today, we will learn brief history of journalist movements and unions in India. We will look into the need and role of journalist unions in India and also learn about important journalists' unions in India. The lesson has been prepared by Mr. Vidhanshu Kumar, who is a journalist with close to 15 years of experience. Mr. Kumar has served in reputed media houses like the Asian Age, IBN 7, NewsX, BBC, etc. He has also taught at a number of colleges and media schools including IIMC. I am Nipunika Shahid. It is said that history of Indian journalism reads like history of Indian national movement for freedom. Reason being, until independence in 1947, an overwhelming majority of the country's journalist community was an active participant in the freedom struggle and suffered the same fate as the other freedom fighters. However, things changed after independence. Press role as watchdog of society and its anti-establishment traditions led the press to tread different path than the ruling politicians, many a times resulting in standoffs. That journalists and politicians have contradictory positions and roles became all the more obvious ever since the first provincial governments came in place in the year 1937. Same politicians who were leading agitations against the British rule and writing prolifically as journalists found themselves on the other side of power when they were elected in the national and state governments when India became free. The fault lines were sharp and journalists started to feel the need to have their own trade unions that could stand for their rights and causes. It is under these lights that journalist unions were formed in the country. Let's have a look now at the brief profiles of some key journalist unions in India. In the October of 1950, leading Indian journalists met and set up the Indian Federation of Working Journalists, IFWJ. Mr. M. Chalapati Rao served as the first president of IFWJ. In 1952, the IFWJ adopted the Delhi Declaration, which remained the main charter of the journalist community for a long time and led to their successful struggles for the setting up of the first Press Commission, followed by the constitution of the Press Council, the enactment of the Indian Working Journalists Conditions of Service Act and acceptance of the wage board machinery to determine the salary structure of the working journalists. A key demand of the Delhi Declaration for delinking the ownership of newspapers from other industries remains unfulfilled because of various disturbing developments in the 1970s in both the national body politic and the journalist movement. While the nation faced the emergency and the beginnings of the coalition era, the IFWJ suffered a vertical split with the departure of a section of journalists. The IFWJ is headed by its president, elected in a nationwide direct voting by thousands of its primary members every 3 years. The president is assisted by a working committee which has a Secretary General, 4 Vice Presidents, 6 Secretaries, a Treasurer and 17 members of Executive, chosen at the plenary session by hundreds of its National Council members. The IFWJ has as its 12th President K. Vikram Rao, formerly of the Times of India. His distinguished predecessors included late M. Chalapati Rao, editor of Lucknow's National Herald, late Pothin Joseph, editor of the Daily Dawn, and Bangalore's Deccan Herald, late Adhir C. Banerjee of Calcutta, late T. R. Ramaswamy, editor of Madras Daily, Makkal Kural, and late Pandit Banarsi Das Chaturvedi of UP. The Indian Federation of Working Journalists is the largest journalist organization in the non-aligned world. As India's first trade union of media persons, the IFWJ has now over 30,000 primary and associate members working for electronic media, news agencies, and 1,260 journals of 17 languages in 35 states and union territories. The National Union of Journalists, India, was established in New Delhi on January 23rd and 24th, 1972. The inaugural address was recited by renowned jurist M.C. Chagla and an eminent editor, Frank Morris of Indian Express. The chairman of reception committee was Mr. Akshay Kumar Jain, who was editor of Navbharat Times. Many senior journalists, editors, and trade union leaders like Mr. V.K. Narasimhan, Mr. P.K. Roy took part in two-day contemplation. From the very first day, the NUJI had stood and fought for improving the economic conditions of journalists, supporting and defending the journalists from all kinds of external and internal aggression on their self-reliance. NUJI, which was set up as a trade union cum professional body to keep journalists' trade union movement free from political alliance, fight for their appropriate and genuine rights, and advocate freedom of press. It is an affiliating body, an unorganized center, and ensures internal democracy by holding proper elections to its decision makers. NUJI has played an important role in the fight for maintaining freedom of press. Indian journalism faced serious threat in 1975 with the emergency rule that came in place. NUJI was 3 years old then, but its task was cut out. NUJI conveyed to the then Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi that she was wrong and demanded the lifting of suppression. However, this resulted in more discrimination against NUJI, and many NUJI activists were removed for undetermined custody under the dreaded Act MISA, Maintenance of Internal Security Act. But NUJI was able to put up a fight for freedom of press. Despite the government oppression, NUJI took the lead in establishing a joint demonstration against the notorious Bihar Press Bill. Then in 1988 came the Defamation Bill. When the Minister of I&B called a meeting of press bodies, NUJI refused to discuss any part of the bill, demanding that it must go back. Finally, the government gave up and the bill was dropped. Working journalists have to struggle for better working conditions every day, and journalist unions are important rallying forum. The NUJI, though, kept out of the Palikar Wage Board, but steadily supported the work of the board and took the advantage of general elections in March 1977 and called upon the political parties to commit themselves to implement the interim relief. In 1977, the new government came in power. In the 80s, NUJI stood for the rights of journalists working with Anand Bazar Patrika and made a deep impression by approaching the Labour and Industries Minister to stop the retrenchment of the journalists employed. In the case of Bachawat Board, the NUJI took initiative to gather all unions meeting to get the improvements to the Working Journalists Act that was passed through a stalled parliament. The meeting of NUJI activists with Rajiv Gandhi led to an improvement. After Sri Arun Bagchi passed away, Sri Shyam Khosla was nominated to organize the working journalists, Chandigarh, Punjab and Haryana. The union worked with newspapers and news agencies to coordinate the work in terms of delays and indecision. This coordination was so useful to present the working journalists' case before the government and parliament. From 2003, the NUJI brought to the notice of the government that a new wage board was necessary because the environment in which the recommendations and suggestions were made had undergone a rapid change. The NUJI worked with other trade union federations to create a confederation of newspapers and news agencies, journalists and non-journalist unions, which was launched in 2005. The confederation also met with Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh in this connection. The government finally announced a decision to constitute such a wage board. All India Newspaper Employees Federations, PTI, Employees Federation and UNI Workers Union are the confederation members. In 1984, the NUJI called for a new wage board. Its agitation led to the Rajiv Gandhi government announcing a new wage board under Justice Bachawat in 1985 with NUJI representative and one of the founders of the organization, Mr. Meenakshi Sundaram, as a member. He died a year later and was replaced by Arun Bagchi, was also then the president of the NUJI. In presenting the working journalists' case before the Bachawat board, the NUJI set new standards of excellence and quality. Using audio-visual techniques for the first time ever before a wage board, NUJI presented financial analysis of newspaper economics that stunned the newspaper managements. In fact, even the newspaper management's representatives present at the board's sitting could not but applaud the NUJI's presentation. The NUJI team for the wage board presentation made a deep impression. NUJ also lobbied for pension scheme for the working journalists. The NUJI is also fighting the menace of journalists working without benefits like PF. In 1972, the NUJI called for a diffusion of ownership to maintain editorial freedom from business and owner interests. There have been countless cases of attacks on working journalists, and in many cases, NUJI have been able to get redressed. It also took missions to Assam wherever the journalists were harassed. Year after year, NUJI continues to face the cases of harassment of journalists and restrictions on press freedom in Nepal and Saudi Arabia as well. The NUJI, along with its several state units, have been regularly holding workshops and lectures to upgrade professional skills. It also organized workshops on how to use the RTI Act to enlarge the impact of reporting news. Since its birth, NUJI insisted on journalists to remain adhered to the tenets of ethical journalism. It also adopted the Agra Declaration of Journalists in February 1981. NUJI is a member of International Federation of Journalists, IFJ. At all the conferences held in Brazil, Korea and elsewhere, NUJI representatives made significant contributions. It also participated in path-breaking conference on conflict resolution that was organized by IFJ in New Delhi. These conferences put more emphasis on the condition of journalists in several regions for being fearless at events of reporting. The NUJI favorably ran one-year-long project for the European Journalism Centre for promoting the exchange of news as well as the journalists between India and Europe to know more about each other's country profile. NUJI has various state units that are represented under East, West, North, South and Central zones. The Indian Newspaper Society (INS) was established in 1939. With its headquarters in London, INS was originally called Indian and Eastern Newspaper Society and looked after Indian and Burmese newspapers. INS is an independent body that plays a major role in protecting freedom of press in India. INS is basically a coordinating body comprising of newspaper owners. It deals with various day-to-day problems arising out of newspaper production and seeks to find speedy solutions. INS membership comprises the owners, proprietors and publishers of print media who discuss and suggest various measures to the government regarding the problems related to the newspaper industry. It is a kind of pressure group which works to protect the interest of newspaper industry in particular and print media in general. The Executive Committee of INS represents the current 990 members from newspapers, journals, periodicals and magazines. The gender skew in Indian media cannot be missed even by untrained eyes. A large majority of Indian journalists are male and male to female ratio becomes more acute as on observes top of the rung. However, contribution of female Indian journalists cannot be ignored and to promote their cause, IWPC was established. The Indian Women's Press Corps is India's most important media organization for women. It is situated in Delhi. IWPS was formed in 1994 when a group of 18 women journalists came together to start a club for women, by women and of women, putting democracy to the ultimate gender test. IWPC is the first and only club for women journalists so far in the country. Today, the IWPC's membership, full-time and freelance, has crossed the magic number of 500. The mission statement of IWPC reads thus: 1. Dedicated to advancing the impact of women in the media by being a resource to members and to the industry. 2. As a non-profit, non-partisan, progressive, professional organization, IWPC aims to create a positive change for women journalists. 3. To create a robust media network by making women's voices and bylines more visible. Any woman journalist from India who has completed 3 years in case of the print media and 5 years in case of the electronic media can become the member of IWPC. IWPC organizes training programs and cultural events from time to time. Press Institute of India was founded in 1963. Press Institute of India is an independent, non-profit trust established to create and sustain the high and responsible standards of journalism required by a developing country committed to democratic functioning. For many years, the PII was the nodal agency for sending journalists, reporters, sub-editors and even photographers for training to the Thomson Foundation, UK. Now, PII's training workshops for journalists are conducted in-house or in cities and rural areas of India. There is a strong focus on rural reporting, development writing and writing on women's empowerment through the panchayats. Over the years, the PII has trained over 4,000 editorial and management professionals from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and other parts of Asia. With liberalization of Indian economy, there has been a steep hike in number of TV news channels. From just being Doordarshan until early 90s, today there are more than 400 channels in India today. Need has been felt time and again to have a body that represents the news broadcasters and takes up their causes, as well as the News Broadcasters Association NBA represents the private television, news and current affairs broadcasters. It is the collective voice of the news and current affairs broadcasters in India. It is an organization funded entirely by its members. The NBA has presently 26 leading news and current affairs broadcasters comprising 53 news and current affairs channels as its members. The NBA presents a unified and credible voice before the government on matters that affect the growing industry. The NBA states that its mission is to serve as the eyes and ears of the private news and current affairs broadcasters, to lobby on its behalf and to act as a central point of joint action on matters of interest. In its charter, NBA states that its objectives are as follows: to promote, aid, help, encourage, develop, protect and secure the interests of the news broadcasters in the Indian television industry and other related entities, to promote awareness about the latest developments in the television industry relating to news broadcasting and to disseminate knowledge among its members and the general public regarding such developments. To provide for the members a place of meeting so as to enable them to work in consensus to achieve common goals for the overall betterment of their industry and to have a common platform or forum at which they may air their grievances and arrive at solutions. To promote the growth of friendly relations amongst the members and amongst persons engaged in the production and broadcasting of the television software, and especially to encourage cooperation among the members so as to maximize mutual benefits. To protect all its members from persons or entities who carry on unfair or unethical practices or who discredit the television industry. No objects of the company will be carried out without obtaining prior approval, NOC, from the concerned authority wherever required. None of the main objects shall be carried out on commercial basis. The NBA becomes a major player in Indian media scenario in the context of regulation. It is often argued that media in general and broadcast media in particular at times cross the boundaries of journalism ethics. Some experts and government argue that there is a need to regulate media, and for that more laws and codes are needed. TV journalists' major argument is that having stringent laws can also infringe upon freedom of press rights and will be a retrograde step. Broadcasters argue that what is required is self-regulation, that media bodies can look upon themselves, also start a platform for media monitoring, complaints regarding content and their redressed. It is in this light NBA comes into picture. Any person aggrieved of any program broadcast by a member or associate member of NBA can file a complaint before the News Broadcasting Standards Authority. The Code of Ethics and Broadcasting Standards laid down by the NBA for violation of which a complaint may be made include the following editorial principles. A news channel must, ensure impartiality and objectivity in reporting, ensure neutrality, ensure that when reporting on crime, that crime and violence are not glorified. Ensure utmost discretion while reporting on violence and crime against women and children. Abhor sex and nudity. Ensure privacy. Ensure that national security is not endangered, refraining from advocating or encouraging superstition and occultism. Ensure responsible sting operations. Thus, NBA is playing a crucial role. However, not every news channel is a part of NBA and questions are raised over its efficiency from time to time. It is well known that strength lies in unity and journalism as a profession needs a lot of strength. Whether it is a question of freedom of press or of protecting the rights of journalists that come under attack from the owners, journalists' unions' relevance become all the more acute. Over a period of time, these unions have taken up journalists' causes with mixed degree of success. The fight is not over yet. That's all for today. See you again. Goodbye.